Well, we're going bowling, and I can't think of anybody better to talk to about that than Chris Landry of LandryFootball.com. Check out that site. Let's break down the Tennessee Clemson matchup as it seems to be two programs heading in different directions. They'll meet in the Orange Bowl as announced over the weekend. So, Chris, before we really start to get down to the X's and O's, let's take a look at this. What do you think of the matchup for Tennessee in Miami?
Well, I think you know it's an intriguing one. I do think that obviously Clemson is had an elite program, and by their standards, this has not been a good year, and neither was last year. This is obviously a great season for Tennessee. So I still think that in terms of a program, that Clemson's kind of on a different level. But how much better is Tennessee getting? I don't think this game's going to tell us, but I think going forward is going to tell us. But what's intriguing about it is it's an opportunity for Tennessee to finish off, which has been a really good season and didn't quite end up like it had hoped with the pivotal injury and a devastating loss to South Carolina. The common thread, as it turns out, you never know what the college season's going to give you. Is who would have thought that South Carolina was going to have such an impact on so many people? I mean, if they don't beat Tennessee, Tennessee is going to likely be in. Well, I think they would be in the playoffs. I'm assuming they would have still beaten Vanderbilt. They'd be in the playoffs. I mean, you could make the case that if they had not beaten Clemson, they would have been in the discussion. Although I don't know that they would have made it. So I think it is an intriguing matchup, one in which I think that Clemson is uh, by by their standards are not as good as they have been, and Tennessee's certainly, I think, been a little bit better. I think what's difficult to determine in bowl games in the modern era, who's going to play in the level of motivation, which is something that is relatively new. And I say new, it's been around now for, gosh, Dave, I don't know if it's, I'd have to go back and look and chart it, almost a decade now. I mean, maybe not quite that long, but the bowl games that are not the playoff bowl games, they're taking on a different meaning. Many of them are not. Many players are opting out, will opt out. Don't know the status of situations here. Transfer portal. Some of those guys won't even be on a team. You know, Clemson's quarterback, who's now been benched, is going to enter the portal as we speak. So it is really hard to forecast, and I think it's hard to look at how you perform in the bowl game as a barometer for what things are going to be, because you're not bringing the same teams back. It's going to be quite different. But what I do think is really important is the extra bowl practices that you have to work young guys, to work your teams, and I think begin to, at least with the guys that are returning, go forward towards the next year. But it's not an indication of, remember, Dave, it used to be you could look at a team because you knew who was coming back, and you knew who was leaving in the draft, and then you knew what type of team somebody would have, and then you could pretty much have a good indication that bowl game, man. None of that even matters. If you look at how you finished in the bowl game, it has no correlation to what It's a coincidence if the bowl game matches up and marries with next season. It's a completely different proposition now.
No, I think you're right. I want to take a look at Clemson. A lot of Tennessee fans maybe haven't seen Clemson at this point, but a defensive line that was supposed to be incredibly dominant up front, injuries and personal tragedy certainly affected that. As you look at their defensive line in particular, what did you see this year as opposed to what was predicted by many analysts?
Well, they're very talented. They can come off the ball. They can rush the passer, and they've played pretty well this year in that regard. Where they've struggled a little bit at the point of attack, physical teams have given them trouble. Notre Dame's the most notable example that crushed them, but that's not Tennessee style. So it'll be interesting to see how well they play, how many of those guys actually play for Clemson. I mean, there's a lot of things we don't know at this point, but it's been an overall disappointment. And again, let that sink in. 2 losses, disappointing. 2 losses, good season. It depends on where your program is. This is a team that's underachieved. The biggest thing is how they've struggled in the secondary. They've not been able to cover very well. This doesn't look, it's certainly not the same Clemson program that competed for national titles. Um, they don't have the elite players in the secondary. And on offense, I know we're talking defense, on offense, they don't have the big time playmakers. And it's the offensive issues that's kind of bled over to some of the problems on defense, meaning it's put their defense in precarious situations. So, look, I think this team is definitely beatable. Um, I thought they played well against North Carolina in the ACC championship game. North Carolina, I mean, they shut them down, and North Carolina has really struggled down the stretch offensively. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting watch.
Yeah, I think so. And I wonder what happened to those playmakers that Clemson was sporting. What did they just miss out recruiting wise? Did some guys not develop? Because I think of that group of receivers they had that included T. Higgins and Mari Rogers, and I mentioned them because they had Tennessee ties. And what kind of happened there? Because they seemed that they were about to become skill position you, and then kind of slipped a little bit.
Well, I think it's a lot like Alabama. When you have those elite guys that are just, you know, to everyone assumes that everybody that comes through is going to be just as good, and we take that for granted. And it's because people look at strictly stars by their name. So, well, that guy was a 5-star and he was great. This guy is going to be the next. Well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. A lot of it, it's different situations. Some of the guys they haven't that they got didn't develop. They missed on some guys in recruiting. So I think it's a combination of recruiting mistakes and developmental errors. I also think that the offense is missing some key components. I mean, for his lack of success as a head coach, Jeff Scott did a really good job at Clemson. But Tony Elliott, who's now at Virginia, did a really good job. Prior to that, you had really good coaches. That Chad Morris, for example, they've had really good coordinators, and I think the development on that side has been lacking. I mean, Dabo's strong suit is not on the field coaching. It's not an X's and O guy, and it's really more about staff and everybody that works their way there kind of are from the Clemson family. And that's the way he does it. And I just don't think that they're as good personnel wise and coaching wise on that side of the ball. And defensively, they lost Brent Venables, which was a big impactful part of how their defense played. And but again, they're not. The Clemson's had really good corners and safeties and cover linebackers, and they don't have the talent that they used to have. So it's a combination of things. It always is, but I would say that they're not as dominant talent wise, and in some of the areas, they're not as good at covering up some of those deficiencies as they have been before. With that said, they're still the most talented team in the ACC, and that's why they end up with a 10-2 record, not an 8-4. Which last year I thought they actually did a pretty good job turning that thing around when it looked like it was spiraling to even a worse record than what they had.
Yeah, and you refer to Venables, who now is the head coach at Oklahoma, one of the top defensive coordinators, of course, in college football when he was at Clemson for a long time. And one guy that we know is going to show up because people will opt out is going to be Cade Klubnik. Klubnik replaces DJ Uiagalelei at quarterback. That happened during the ACC championship game. Some would say it should have happened sooner. Just give me a thumbnail sketch of what Cade brings to the table at quarterback for Clemson.
Well, he's a dual threat guy. He's young. He's excuse me, um, a little behind in terms of field vision and knowing where to go. But what he can do is he can bring his legs to the offense, which to me is, if you look back at Clemson's success, they've always had guys that can be effective running it. Now I know Trevor Lawrence was not used a whole lot, but in that way. But I think that's a big part of what the staple of what their offense is. So I think he brings the dual threat capabilities. I think you can roll the pocket more. I think when you rode DJ out, he wasn't nearly as effective. He's definitely a platform thrower, and I think he's a little late to pull the trigger. Whereas Klubnik is a guy I think that can roll out, give him some half field reads, and I think give him some run pass options. He's going to be really successful. So I think what Tennessee's going to face is a dual threat guy. Now, that's going to be a big part of it. To me, their offense this year has been built around Will Shipley. I don't want to make any assumptions. I don't know how to preview a game when I really don't know if Will's going to play or not. He's a Christian McCaffrey type player for them. Now, I'm just going to make the assumption he's going to play, and I'm not saying it based on information because I just don't know, but he is what makes their offense go. He is an outstanding runner. He's an outstanding receiver. He is a leader. He is a tough guy, even though he's slight of size. He's kind of the heart of their offense.
Yep. Well, as far as the opt-out thing, it's something that I know frustrates fans, and I do want to get your thoughts as a former scout on that. Chalk Talk is brought to you by Owl's Nest Barbecue. They've got the rubs, the sauces, they've got the expertise to put you in the right direction and give you the right products to fit your taste, and they've got an incredible selection there in Ottawa, right next door to Steve Ray's Midnight Oil, a proud Michelin distributor, and they take care of my car. They should take care of yours. But again, Owl's Nest Barbecue, if you haven't been there yet, you're going to be blown away, and they've got the Green Mountain Grills as well. Chris, when I look at a guy that opts out of a bowl game, I look at it, and you mentioned Christian McCaffrey. He was one of the first big names to do it. I look at it different than I used to. I used to look at it as, oh, you're giving up on your team. And part of me still does, but I'm a little mixed in that I also understand what he's doing if there's not a championship at stake. As a scout, and you were a scout for a long time in the NFL, how do you look at that? Or does it have any effect whatsoever?
It still bothers me, and I'm still doing a lot of scouting work for teams. And one of the things that I always ask guys, and did it and have done it for the past several years, is always ask them about that, about opting out. We use a term opt out to make it sound better. It's
quitting.
You quit. You quit on your team. Like you come to accept the fact it's like society. I mean, there's certain things in certain ways that some of us in a different era were raised that, when those who have kids, it's just you just treat your kids a little differently than probably you were treated because the world has changed. And I think it's a byproduct of a lot of things that not just societally, but we've made the bowl games insignificant other than the playoff ones. And so if they're insignificant, then, a player is going to protect himself as they go and prepare for the draft. So I think the process in the system that we've created is opened the door for that. And then I think now more with the NIL, and now you not only have guys that are going to opt out for the draft, it is now December 5th, the first official day you can get into the portal. So I'm not going to stay with my team and practice and play. I am thinking about myself because maybe I can go to the portal because I can go to XYZ University and I've got maybe a better NIL deal or a better opportunity that fits me better. It's a more of an I, instead of we approach. So as a scout, when I talk with them, I do try to get the information, but if you eliminate a lot of guys that opt out, is that what we're calling it? You're missing a lot of guys. The point is, it's becoming more and more acceptable. While it used to be, I would sit there and be offended that someone would do that. I have also softened with that's kind of the norm now, and it's not the same. And it was eye raising with Christian McCaffrey did it, and I knew what he was doing, didn't like it. It rankled me to no end, and yet it opened the door, and it's more and more, and it just becomes. I hate to say it, it's like anything. When we turn on the news, we get desensitized to it. I mean, when you turn on and there would be a shooting or a mass shooting or something, it would just rock us. Well, today it's just, hey, Dave, hear about there's another shooting. What's going on? I mean, it's like it's not acceptable, but it's like we've become desensitized to it because it's becoming more and more the norm. I certainly don't want to make the comparison to something as tragic as a shooting to what we're talking about. It's maybe a poor example and an extreme example of we just see things a little differently, and it is not a part of what I look at. But I will say this. This is held true to me as a scout. When I do my evaluations and hand them in, I look at guys that opt out. And in my view, they've got questions that they've got to answer to me. Meaning, I don't perceive them as bad or a problem or as selfish. I'm not going to make that judgment. I'm going to give them a chance to explain it. But they've got a little bit of that, to me, that a little bit of I would say, a cloud over them for me, in that I am more impressed with when I see a guy stick it out and play. For example, anybody watch college football this weekend? How about Max Duggan?
Yeah.
He was a backup quarterback at TCU. Okay. He was a backup quarterback last offseason. Did he go into the portal? Did he say, you know what, I should be the starter, I'm leaving? I turn the tables. I admire a guy that says, no, I'm going to work harder. I'm going to compete. I'm going to stay with my teammates, and I'm going to try to win it. That's maybe less and less prevalent today, but that impresses the heck out of me. So it doesn't make somebody that does it bad, but that's something that I'm going to want to see, because my first thought is this guy a me guy? And how is that? If he is, then it's a problem. If it's just what's best for him and everything else in his DNA and his activities in football show that he is a team guy, then I'm not going to hold it against him, because I don't think, I mean, you certainly would not look at Christian McCaffrey as a me guy. He is a team guy, and he's a hard worker, and he's a competitor. He opted out, so you got to look at that. But I can tell you, I had some questions for him in one of our meetings, and I don't think he's real happy with how I phrased it and what we said. But those are the things that I think you got to ask some tough questions about guys like that, because I do want to know. I do need to know for my recommendations for teams, what are you getting? And I think that's what's changed a little bit today.
And Tennessee has a player that kind of followed that same path in Joe Milton. So we'll see how it works out for him. He certainly could have opted out, or not opted out, transferred, entered the transfer portal, and who would have blamed him? For Chris Landry, go to LandryFootball.com. Hit like if you enjoyed this conversation about a quick preview of Tennessee and Clemson. We appreciate it when you like, subscribe, and share. We certainly appreciate that. For Chris Landry at LandryFootball.com, I'm Dave Hooker. Chalk Talk brought to you by Owl's Nest Barbecue, a production of Off the Hook Sports.